Okay, so I just wanted to get you guys started. I have a good lead in before. Can you guys, is that working?
It is.
So, okay. Before Greg gets started, I'm gonna make you uncomfortable, and then I'm gonna share a quote with you and brag about one of you. So, let's get up. Gonna start getting used to it. Slowly but surely I'll get you guys used to this, because this is how we'll be starting our meetings from now on. So shake it out. Shake out and release any negative energy, anything that wasn't working for you this morning. Take a deep breath in. You're my hero. Take a deep breath out. Okay, we're going to start off with an affirmation. Does anyone want to choose the affirmation this morning? It's I am, and then a word. What would you like it to be? I
am worthy.
Love that one. Love that one. And everyone can always use that one. So on the count of 3, you're going to count with me. We're going to yell loud and proud and make people think we're starting a cult in here. And we're going to say, I am worthy. You guys good?
Yeah.
Okay, on the count of 1, 2, 3. I am worthy. Awesome. You guys did a great job. Take a seat.
I'll bring them from you upstairs.
All right. So I wanted to share a... you guys will get used to it. It took my last office a little while, but then it was like a competing contest of who could be the loudest. So it was good. Get your energy going, changes your state. Who's been doing affirmations now that maybe didn't do them before? Yeah, just now? Awesome. That's awesome. I wrote something down. Let me see where I found it that I wanted to share with you guys. Let me see here. And I want to see, did I put it on the right phone? Hang on. I have so many little folders on here. Let me through my schedule. Yeah, here we go. Okay, so I heard this really cool quote yesterday, and it made me think of all you guys, because I could tell you something that'll help you with your business. Whenever I hear something, I have it with life, and then I'm like, oh, how could you use this for your business? So this was a really cool quote by Don Miguel. He's an author of The 4 Agreements and a lot of really cool other books. And I was reading Mastery of Self, which is a really good book, if you guys can read that. And the quote is, success is the natural consequence of doing something you love to do. Pretty cool quote, right? So, and then, the universe is really cool, I love it. I get this text from Lisa. You're the one that I'm going to brag about today. I get a text from Lisa, and she's adorable. Like, she's smiling, she sends me her schedule, and she's like, here's my schedule, I'm going to print it out for you. And she's doing something. However, through the process, and as we keep going, I give you guys lots of ideas. What she did is and when Greg did that video, is she's chosen the things that she loves to do. It really goes with her personality and something that you're good at, right? Now, what you need to know is if you keep doing those things, like just pick the things that work for you, because there's, 35 different ways or more to get business, right? And she's doing those things. You're going to have a really good flow of business that will come to you, which you guys are going to learn a lot about today. Greg is going to show you how business will come to you. And I really, really love that because it actually inspired me, because I used to be so good at notes and thank yous and all this stuff, and I kind of fell off the wagon a little bit, so it reminded me to get back on my wagon. So it was one of the things that I used to be really, really good at, and then I allowed life to get in my way. And so good for you. Stay on that track. That's what works for you. Now, when you know Lisa, you know her personality. Don't you think that would really work for her? Yeah, just like the book, this, and then just people, like she has that energy, people would just love her. So when you find the thing that works for you that you will do and you love to do in the business, do more of that, okay? And then the business will come to you. Because when we get outside of our authentic self, and we're trying to do something that we're not, failure seeks it, right? Anytime we try to do something we're not, failure will be the next thing that happens, okay? So, like if you were on the phone all day trying to do expires, God love you, Lisa, I just don't think it's your thing, okay? It's not your thing. I mean, you probably could stumble in it because probably would be like, I don't know what I'm saying, and they would probably feel sorry for you, and whatever. So yeah. The other thing I wanted to share with you real quick, Adam Awesome came to me yesterday with the schedule for you guys doing the boot camp that haven't got your schedules to me yet, and that's like a lot of you. He came to me and he said, I've never done this before, and we were going over the schedule, and what he didn't know is right in front of me, I had a 15-minute, which was my day, right? And he was like blocking these things. I go, no, it's kind of like this. And I go, look at this thing right here. Because this is how I work, it's how I make sure I get things done, right? And it said, it goes like 9:20, call this person, and literally within, and it's specifically what I was doing. And yeah, it was my schedule. And then this, and I go, this is what it is. And he would have like from this time to this time, get ready. I go, no. 5:30, wake up, drink a glass of water, meditate. 6 o'clock, get dressed, go for a run. 6:30, get in the shower, brush teeth, blow dry hair. Like that. I go, that's how specific your schedule needs to be, and then it will become your routine. And you'll adapt it, and you will automatically, naturally know how many minutes it takes to do something, and you'll know what you can crunch into it and what you can't. Does that make sense? Yeah, and that's how you actually get things done. And the whole point of it, is so that when you're so productive in the day, when you go home, you check out and you check into your life and your family, right? So that's what we really want. We want to create our balance, which everyone, is that the hardest thing ever? Yeah. Balance, right? Yeah. So when we get to there, and it takes a while, we will have balance and we will be out of our head, that crazy place 1, 2, 3. That you're not supposed to go to. Right? And then we get a check into our life and everything's harmonious and peaceful. So, welcome to awesome Greg Herter. I don't know, I can imagine part that you guys are getting today. Imagine all the classes that he does, you're getting a piece of what's normally a 3-day seminar. And this is how I had the business come to me, and really, really amazing. I would say this is probably like a huge game changer in your career if you do even a minute of the stuff he tells you to do. I do believe that everyone who's talking about your own personal brand, I believe everyone needs their own personal brand in this business. I would not be at this company if they wouldn't allow it. It was one of the first questions I asked, because I don't know if they used to allow it. However, I'm so pro-agent in your own business that I would have protested it. I'd be like, you can't do that, they need their own brand, it's not about you, right? So your brand, whatever company you were, so your brand and you're powered by First Name Christie's, right? We power you, but you still have your own brand. Does that make sense? Because you need to have that. People will list and buy with you, they're not listing and buying with us. Does that make sense? And so if we would think that, we're being stupid. So that was an environment for you. So welcome the awesome, amazing, great
All right. Thank you. All right, now that we got off to a good start, what I want to do today is talk about branding. And unfortunately, what I found is that when most agents think about this concept of branding, they think about it from a realtor's perspective. And today, it's so important to not think like a realtor. And the hard part is that the second you start the path to become a realtor, you get brainwashed. You start taking classes. You go to real estate practice, you go to principles, you go to, economics or whatever your elective is. And that whole process of getting a real estate exam or a real estate license makes you start thinking like a realtor. And by the time you pass your test, here's the biggest challenge. You no longer think like a consumer. And the great advantage that new agents have is that they are less detached from being a consumer. The longer you are in real estate, the more you start to think like a realtor. And that becomes a bigger and bigger disadvantage. because you know too much. And you can't imagine what it's like to not know what you know. In the educational field, it's called the curse of knowledge. It's one of the things they talk about to teachers at the college level all the time. You get up in front of a class and you start talking, and you cannot imagine those freshmen sitting in your college class could not know some of the very fundamental things that you talk about. And yet the reality is you're talking at a very high level because, well, to you it seems like a low level, but gosh, after all that education, you talk a different way. So we need to talk about how to build your brand. And to start off this morning, I want you to think about, what are your activities focused on doing? If I looked at what you did in the last week, what would your prospecting activities really be focused on? Would you be focused on getting a transaction? And can anybody give me an idea of what an activity might be that would be focused at getting a transaction?
Showing properties. Get a listing on.
See, and this is already where we're getting into trouble. So if you're showing a property, you already have a client. If you're getting a listing signed, you're 90% of the way there. So yes, it's moving towards a transaction, but what activities do you do typically in a week to try and generate business?
I network.
Network. Open houses. Door knock. Educate, cold call.
Instagram.
We do all these things, and the reason that most of these prospecting activities are focused on getting a transaction is that they are relatively short-term in focus. I hold an open house trying to get a transaction, and yes, I need to follow up, and it's probably going to turn into a transaction 2 or 3 months down the road, but it's still fairly short-term in its focus. How much of your activity in the last week was actually designed to build your long-term real estate business? And who can give me an example of what those activities might be?
Thank you notes with lottery cards.
All right, thank you notes with lottery cards.
Constant touching of your past clients.
Constantly touching your past clients.
Work on your database.
Working on your database. Anything else?
Farming.
Farming, if you are doing consistently. Now, if you're building a business, what's the one thing most CEOs are most concerned with? What?
Making money.
Bottom line.
Profitability.
And I know this is a branding class, so we don't want to go, but if you're running a company, yes, you're concerned about brand, but what's the CEO's number one job?
Longevity. Making money.
Motivating.
Make sure the business stays solvent.
Make sure the business stays solvent. If I'm going to keep the business solvent, what do I need to be looking at?
Revenue.
So this is one of those interesting things. I want you to become business people. See, CEOs tend to think, what's my strategic plan for the next 3 to 5 years? Where are we going? And how are we going to get there? If you really are thinking like a business person, you must be forward-looking. You must be thinking about, okay, where are things going? What am I going to do? And how am I going to get there? So just out of curiosity, if I asked you how much time you're spending on prospecting for the short term versus long term, what percentage of your business is spent on long-term business building versus short-term activities?
50%.
So if it's 50%, that would be pretty good. Most agents that I seem to talk to are working on 90% short term, and if they're lucky, 10% long term. On the other hand, if you really want to build a long-term successful business, I really believe that 3/4 of your time must be focused on building a long-term business. And 1/4 of time goes towards the short-term activities. What's the biggest challenge with short-term versus long-term activities?
You don't get the instant gratification or the instant.
You don't get the instant gratification, and most importantly, you don't get instant money. Short-term activities produce short-term gains, a transaction. And this is where you see agents going from transaction to transaction and transaction, and they may do very well, be very successful agents, but they never build a business. These are the agents that if they go on vacation, their business goes on vacation as well.
Every time.
Every single time, without fail. That's because they are driving their business. They are in a job, not a business. A business is something you can walk away from and will keep operating. Will keep running consistently without you. Unfortunately, most agents are always prospecting for somebody who is ready to buy or sell real estate in the short term. Search-based business models tend to produce the fastest short-term results. But over time, they limit your true productivity potential because they are dependent upon how hard and how long you can work. And there is always a limit to that. Now, you can do very well. I know some people that are incredibly consistent door knockers, cold callers, and they do very well, but when they stop working, their business goes away. 85% of great agents, on the other hand, generate transactions based using an attraction-based business model. They have a long-term thought process that says, I need to think about how to generate a long-term business. Over time, they are building a brand and identity that attracts a steady flow of business coming towards them each and every month. This is how they can go on vacation and still have business come in. People call up and say, oh gosh, I want to list with Phil Herman. Great. He's not available for a week, but I'd be happy to have one of his listing assistants come out and take your listing and get everything going. And people say, okay, because Phil has already earned the business long before he actually got the call. Attraction-based business models take longer, require larger upfront investments, but in the end produce a much higher return on investment. And this is where agents tend to lose sight of it. People say, well, Greg, what's the right thing to do? Well, there's no right or wrong, but I really want you to think about what you're focused on. I love this quote from Peter Drucker. He says, the aim of marketing your brand is to make selling superfluous. Ideally, marketing should result in a customer who is ready to buy. All that should be needed then is to make the product or service available. And if you really understand this, you'll realize that if you focus on building a long-term flow of business, your life will be much better as a realtor. Now, people say, well, Greg, is there a right method or a wrong method? No, there is no right or wrong. Both methods work. And what you have to do is say, what is the right percentage for you? And I actually recommend that you combine both methods. I have seen people that have come in and built a business purely from a marketing perspective. But they tend to have both time and money to build that business. So many people say, well, Greg, I don't have time or money. I need money soon. Well, then you're going to have to do short-term activities and start working on the long-term activities. So there's no right or wrong, but here's the key. if you get sucked into short-term prospecting and you never build your brand, then you know what your real estate career is going to look like for the next 20 or 30 years. And I've talked to lots of agents that way that have been in real estate for 30 years, and yes, they have some past client business, but they do not have a business. And after 25 or 30 years, you should have such a flow of business coming towards you, you will never have to prospect again as long as you do your marketing correctly. So what percentage of your lead generation is based on searching and what is based on attracting? And I really would like you to start moving towards more of an attraction-based approach. And for each one of you, it's going to be a different percentage, depending upon where you are financially, what you're trying to accomplish, and what you want to do. Now, do understand there's a trade-off. The trade-off is time versus money. People say, well, Greg, it does take money to build a brand. It does take some money, and I want you to understand that. But if you have time and no money, you're going to do all kinds of short-term activities. If you have no time, then you need to say, how do I buy time? And my mentor, Jim Rohn, taught me that you can buy time. And we don't think about it often, but you buy time by saying, how do I get other people to do certain activities? And maybe it starts by hiring a personal assistant to do all of your busy work, to fill up your car with gas, to go get the oil change, to go to the cleaners, to pick up your kids, to drop them off. Now, the funny thing is, sometimes we think, well, gosh, that's not right. Fortunately, I've had some interesting experiences. One of the people that I worked with for a long time, by the name of Bob Reish, his daughter was a personal assistant for a billionaire for about 7 years. And I had an opportunity to actually get to know a billionaire, have some conversations. Now, he and his family, he and his wife, do not do anything that they feel is a waste of their time. And he calculated out that he is earning about $800 a minute. And he said, if I can pay somebody $800 or less, it's better for me to pay them to do something that I don't really want to do, whether that's cooking, whether that's cleaning, whether that's driving, whatever it is. He said, because now I can focus all my attention on everything that I want to do. And let me tell you, he packs an incredible amount of life into living. We, as agents, are often doing things that are actually counterproductive to our own productivity, when we should be hiring a high school student to do them. And then we wonder why we have no time left over. So understand there is a trade-off of time and money, but you have to make sure that you make the trade-off. Then you want to focus on building your brand. And I want you to think about what branding really is. And branding is building a story that gets people to want to do business with you. It's that simple. It's not complex, it's not hard. And it has very little to do with credibility. And the funny thing is, if we look at branding every place else outside of real estate, the things that realtors do to try and generate business, we see almost none of it in marketing. But look at the great success stories of marketing. Rolex is a prime example. Now, Rolex has been around for some now, I think, 260 years. It's a very old watchmaker. But until about 80 years ago, Rolex was just another watchmaker. Now, Rolex, for a long time, in their old marketing, told you about the quality of the watchmakers. the years that they had to go to train to be able to actually make a watch. They talked about the quality of the ingredients that went into their watch, the purity of the gold, and a variety of different things. And Rolex was a reasonably successful watchmaker. But they were just one of the pack in luxury watches. Until about 80 years ago, when they hired a new marketing guy and he said, "You guys are nuts. You keep talking about you, about how hard you guys are working, about how much you know." And he said, "I have something to tell you. Your clients simply do not care." They said, "What are we going to do?" He said, "Well, what we need to do is talk about the people wearing the watch. We need to create an image so that now people want to wear the watch." And they said, "Well, how do you do that?" They said, "Well, why don't we go find unique people that are wearing our watch and tell stories about them?" And Rolex started a unique marketing campaign that has been running for the last 80 years continuously and is still going strong to this day. This is one of their classic ads. It says, "Her piano will woo your heart while her voice seduces your soul." So after reading the headline, what do we now know about a Rolex? This is a Rolex ad, after all. So what do we know about a Rolex? This is the interactive part.
Oh. Celebrities like to wear them.
Based on those two lines,
You know who wears it? Something about who wears it.
If you wear a Rolex, you're sexy, you're talented.
Well, you guys are reading a lot into it. I just read the headline. Yeah. So what do we actually know about a Rolex? Nothing. Not a hard question. I'm worried about you guys already.
That's why we're here.
So now let's read the whole ad. Dinah Krall's fingers dance across a piano keyboard with delicious grace and delicate power. Her voice will grip your heart with its gravelly texture in one moment, and then melt it with its sensual smoothness the next. She creates a sound that not only satiates the most sophisticated jazz purists, but has broadened the oral pleasures of pop audiences around the world. Her hits tend to linger at the top of the charts for months, not weeks, regardless of music trends, and at award shows, her name is becoming a regular. Amongst the great divas of jazz, there's a new name, Dinah Krall. So now that we've read the entire Rolex ad, what do we now know about a Rolex?
Nothing.
That she's paying them 25% of her gig now to advertise for her.
I think you've got it wrong. They're paying her and help promoting her career. What we actually know is that, oh, here's this unique star, and she wears a Rolex. Does it say anything at all about the watch? In ad after ad, they tell you about these unique people. They say, "Oh my goodness, look at these great people." All we know is that they wear a Rolex. And their entire campaign is based on one concept. If you are a Rolex, you're a unique person. That's it. Do they ever tell you if Rolex keeps time well?
No. No.
So does Rolex have a reputation for being an incredibly accurate watch?
Yes.
No.
Now, I know because I'm a unique person, I wear a Rolex. And I know it keeps a lousy time.
Oh. Oh.
Remember that Rolexes are all mechanical movements. That is the definition of a Rolex. Rolex does not have digital watches. They are all mechanical. So they can't even talk about keeping good time. But here's the question, why, in today's age, do we wear a watch?
Prestige.
To let people know we're unique people. Why? We keep time with our phone.
Yeah.
So it's not about the time. It's about the image they have created. And yet Rolex has consistently dominated the luxury watchmaker. In fact, if you take a look at the medium, upper, middle range of watches, Rolex dominates that marketplace. They are by far the most profitable, most successful watchmaker on the planet. Now, if you get into the really high-end watches, people say Rolex doesn't even make, high-end watches. Well, yeah. But those watches start at about $100,000 and go up. Rolex goes from about, $5,000 for a cheap Rolex to maybe $250 at the highest. So they understand their marketplace. They understand what they're trying to do. What separates the great agents today from the rest is the great agents understand that they are selling themselves, their style, their image. They are selling a brand. They are not selling real estate. And this confuses a lot of agents. I hear so many agents say, Greg, I can't believe it. I just did a transaction with this super successful agent, and they are a total flake. Why do people ever call them? And it's not that hard to figure out. It's because they have a stronger, more powerful brand than you do. And if you think you can tell them, well, I'm going to work harder, I'm going to be more educated, know more, and think that's going to compete with a brand, you are deluding yourself. And unfortunately, agents do all the wrong things to compete. The purpose of brand building is to create a subjective preference in people's minds. Who can tell me what subjective is versus objective?
Based on opinion.
It's based on opinion. Does a subjective opinion have any basis in fact? No. And this is the number one thing I need you to understand. This is a subjective opinion. It's not a right or wrong. Unfortunately, realtors want to work in this area of right or wrong, and they want to have some objectivity. They want to prove that they are better. You fought the wrong battle. Today, your success as a realtor depends upon finding the battle inside the client's mind, not in the quality of service you provide. Now, I am not telling you to be a flaky realtor. I do believe the quality of service you provide makes a difference, just not nearly as much difference as most people think. And even if you provide great service and you don't follow up consistently, you don't enhance your brand, it will not help you build a business. Learn from one of the greatest marketers of our time. Steve Jobs, I think, was truly one of the greatest marketers ever. People say, well, no, he was a technology person. He was not. He was not a technical genius, but he was a marketing genius at every level. And I have a little video about Steve. And this video was shot right after Steve came back to Apple for the second time. If you know Steve's story, Steve and Steve Wozniak started Apple. Then they grew the company, and eventually Apple's board ousted Steve because he could be a little challenging and difficult. He went on and started a new company called Next, and about 10 years later, Apple had basically died. They were hemorrhaging money. And they were about ready to go bankrupt. And the Apple board realized that probably they made a mistake getting rid of Steve. And they approached him and said, listen, we'll give you a huge chunk of Apple if you come back. And they actually gave Steve more stock ownership of Apple than when he left the first time. As sort of an incentive, they said, we think you're the only person on the planet that can probably save this company. And so Steve came back to Apple. And this was shot a few months after he came back, and he was revamping their activities. And listen to what he has to say on marketing. To me, there is so much to learn in this short little video.
Good morning. We were up till 3 o'clock last night finishing this advertising up, and I want to show it to you in a minute, see what you think of it. I've been back about 8 to 10 weeks, and we've been working really hard. And what we're trying to do is not something really highfalutin. We're trying to get back to the basics. We're trying to get back to the basics of great products, great marketing, and great distribution. And I think that Apple has pockets of greatness, but in some ways has drifted away from doing the basics really well. So we started with the product line. We looked at the product roadmap going out for a few years, and we said a lot of this doesn't make sense. And it's way too much stuff, and there's not enough focus. And so we actually got rid of 70% of the stuff on the product roadmap. I mean, I couldn't even figure out the damn product line after a few weeks. I kept saying, well, what is this model? How does this fit? And I started talking to customers, and they couldn't figure it out either. And so you're going to see the product line get much simpler, and you're going to see the product line get much better. And there's some new stuff coming out that's incredibly nice. In addition, we've been able to focus a lot more on the 30% of the gems and add some new stuff in that is going to take us in some whole new directions. So we are incredibly excited about the products. And I think we're really thinking differently about the kinds of products we have to build. And the engineering team is incredibly excited. I mean, I came out of the meeting with people that had just gotten their projects canceled, and they were 3 feet off the ground with excitement because they finally understood where in the heck we were going. And they were really excited about the strategy. And that gets us to the marketing side of things. To me, marketing's about values. This is a very complicated world. It's a very noisy world. And we're not going to get a chance to get people to remember much about us. No company is. And so we have to be really clear on what we want them to know about us. Now, Apple, fortunately, is one of the half a dozen best brands in the whole world. Right up there with Nike, Disney, Coke, Sony. It is one of the greats of the greats, not just in this country, but all around the globe. And but even a great brand needs investment and caring if it's going to retain its relevance and vitality. And the Apple brand has clearly suffered from neglect in this area in the last few years. And we need to bring it back. The way to do that is not to talk about speeds and feeds. It's not to talk about MIPS and megahertz. It's not to talk about why we're better than Windows. The dairy industry tried for 20 years to convince you that milk was good for you. It's a lie, but they tried anyway. And the sales were going like this. And then they tried Got Milk, and the sales have gone like this. Got Milk doesn't even talk about the product. Matter of fact, it focuses on the absence of the product. But the best example of all, and one of the greatest jobs of marketing the universe has ever seen is Nike. Remember, Nike sells a commodity. They sell shoes. And yet, when you think of Nike, you feel something different than a shoe company. In their ads, as you know, they don't ever talk about the products. They don't ever tell you about their air soles and why they're better than Reebok's air soles. What does Nike do in their advertising? They honor great athletes, and they honor great athletics. That's who they are. That's what they are about. Apple spends a fortune on advertising. You'd never know it. You'd never know it. So when I got here, Apple just fired their agency. They were doing a competition with 23 agencies that, 4 years from now would have picked one. And we blew that up, and we hired Chiat, the ad agency that I was fortunate enough to work with years ago. We created some award-winning work, including the commercial voted the best ad ever made in 1984 by advertising professionals. And we started working about 8 weeks ago. And the question we asked was, our customers want to know who is Apple and what is it that we stand for. Where do we fit in this world? And what we're about isn't making boxes for people to get their jobs done, although we do that well. We do that better than almost anybody in some cases. But Apple's about something more than that. Apple, at the core, its core value, is that we believe that people with passion can change the world for the better. That's what we believe. And we've had the opportunity to work with people like that. We've had an opportunity to work with people like you, with software developers, with customers who have done it in some big and some small ways. And we believe that in this world. People can change it for the better. And that those people that are crazy enough to think they can change the world are the ones that actually do. And so what we're going to do in our first brand marketing campaign in several years is to get back to that core value. A lot of things have changed. The market's a totally different place than it was a decade ago. And Apple's totally different, and Apple's place in it is totally different. And believe me, the products and the distribution strategy and the manufacturing are totally different, and we understand that. But values and core values, those things shouldn't change. The things that Apple believed in at its core are the same things that Apple really stands for today. And so we wanted to find a way to communicate this. And what we have is something that I'm very moved by. It honors those people who have changed the world. Some of them are living, some of them are not. But the ones that aren't, as you'll see, you know that if they'd ever used a computer, it would have been a Mac. And the theme of the campaign is Think Different. It's the people, honoring the people who think different and who move this world forward. And it is what we are about. It touches the soul of this company.
So what's your number one takeaway from watching Steve talk about marketing?
Passion.
What should marketing be based on?
Consumer. Based on the consumer.
It's based on your values. See, and he didn't say it was based on the consumer. He said, your consumers want to know what you stand for. What are your values? What are you about that they can believe in? And he said, we're about believing that people with passion can make a difference in the world. So how did that translate into an actual commercial? Well, let's take a look at the commercial that most people credit for saving Apple. This commercial has done absolutely amazing things. Now, Steve came back to Apple. Apple was struggling. Now, the first thing that he did was he looked at what they were doing and he realized, oh my goodness, Apple is so unfocused, they're trying to do everything. When he came back, Apple made 163 different versions of their computers. And in the first 2 weeks, he said, okay, we're going to scrap all of them except 8. And he said, that's the only 8 we're going to focus on. So he simplified and gave them focus. And then he said, we need to get people to talk about us. It's not about our computers, it's about what we believe. And he launched this advertising campaign.
Here's to the crazy ones, the misfits, the rebels, the troublemakers, the round pegs in the square holes, the ones who see things differently. They're not fond of rules, and they have no respect for the status quo. You can quote them, disagree with them, glorify or vilify them. About the only thing you can't do is ignore them, because they change things. They push the human race forward. And while some may see them as the crazy ones, we see genius. Because the people who are crazy enough to think they can change the world are the ones who do.
So here's my question. What did they tell you about an Apple computer?
Nothing.
So why did people buy Apple computers? And in the first month that this commercial broke, Apple computer sales jumped 28% in a single month.
Wow.
This commercial ran continuously for 7 years, probably one of the longest running commercials ever, because it just kept working. So what were they selling?
The most expensive computers on the market.
But reliable. They're different.
Their brand.
See, and unfortunately, this is where you're thinking like realtors. What did Rolex sell?
Story. It's like start over.
See, and I've given you two classic examples of great marketing, and hopefully you can say, oh, they're selling an identity. Rolex understands they are selling the identity to people that buy their watches. Apple is selling an identity. I'm different. I think outside of the box. That's why we pay a lot more money for an Apple product than a Windows machine. Because what is Windows?
Boring.
It's the box. It's 1984 all over again. That is exactly it. They understand they're selling an identity. What does Tiffany's sell?
Blue boxes. They have right
Okay, so you guys are all getting an F so far. I don't know how I could have been any clearer. An identity, all right. What's the identity? The blue box. How many of you would rather get something in a blue box than almost anything else on the planet? Because it's like, oh, it came from Tiffany's.
You can put anything in it. Just a damn
No, trust me, you can't. What if you went and got one of those blue boxes, and then you said, honey, would you marry me? Oh, and you know what? I was so bright, I bought this diamond from Walmart.
Yeah, that says not much.
See, we say, See, we are really buying identities when we look at it in so many different ways. So here's my question for you. Are you willing to think differently about your marketing as a real estate professional? Building a brand as a realtor is one of the most powerful ways to attract a steady flow of business towards you. But this is important. Now, one of the easiest ways is to pick an area of specialization. And unfortunately, most people, when I say specialize, they think about geography. And I really don't want you to think about geography. I want you to think about an identity, a lifestyle, a professional group. That can have such a huge impact. And if you have any doubt on how this works, I recommend you read The Long Tail. And The Long Tail is the story of how technology has turned the mass market into millions of niche markets. Think about the music industry today. Think about the biggest stars of today and compare their record sales to the Beatles or Elvis or Frank Sinatra. And they are not anywhere close to the same number of sales. And we say, well, why is that? Well, today, with the internet, we have more access to more types of music, more genres than ever before. In fact, 7 or 8 years ago, I was watching a PBS special on a guy from Germany that makes music with Tupperware bowls. Now, I have to say, to me, it did not sound like music. But this guy makes $150,000 to $200,000 a year selling Tupperware music. Now, I am sure that he has tapped 99% of the Tupperware market on the planet because he can reach them all on the internet. And because we have so much more choice today, the mass market has been flattened. And we need to understand that in real estate, don't think mass market, think what is the niche that I can go after? What is the segment where I can truly differentiate myself in a meaningful way to a core group of people? The secret to capitalizing on social media is understanding how to do this. Now, it's interesting, when you read the books on social media, they will tell you to really do well in social media, you do not want to have a niche market. They will tell you what you really need is a micro niche. Now, why are most of the super successful social media people today, the personalities out there, they all started with micro niches. A super tiny little group that they could provide real value to, and they could turn them into what they call followers that raved about them, talked about them, and the followers are what really generated the activity. If you take a look at any of the social media stars of today, they all started with an incredibly targeted group and let it build from there. You start small and build and expand. And I need you to understand that. Sometimes we look at people like some of the top agents out there. We look at Sean, and we say, how's he doing so much business? How did Sean start his real estate career? What was he focused on?
Harbor.
Huntington Harbor.
Yeah.
Is he limited to the harbor today?
No.
But he started with a specific focus. Now, is the Huntington Harbor really big? No, it's a very specific marketplace, and he saturated it. He targeted over and over again as the Huntington Harbor specialist, built business, and expanded. What a brilliant strategy.
And he's only 18 with braces.
18 with braces. He was young. I don't know if he was 18, but
Yeah, he was.
I want you to know that, guess what? That's where you're going to start. Pick a segment and say, this is a segment I am going to dominate. You want to brand yourself. Now, branding is so important. Big businesses long embraced branding as a way of beating out the competition. Now individuals are following suit with winning results. Branding has always been the province of companies like Coca-Cola, Disney, Heinz. But as business intensifies and competition heats up, individuals as diverse as Barack Obama and Martha Stewart are using the power of personal branding to make themselves stand out. By forging a targeted reputation in one's field, anyone from an assistant to a real estate agent can become a brand. Anybody can become a brand. You just have to figure out what your brand is about. Personal branding is increasingly important. In the past, people selected service professionals to the yellow pages or the internet. Now with Facebook and Google, you have even more options in less time. A personal brand is what makes the difference in being selected. So how do you create a brand? Well, the first key is to understand that if you're going to create a brand, you've got to create some trade-offs. You've got to take a look at your competitors and say, how can I be different from them? Not, how can I be just like them? And unfortunately, most agents are trying very hard to be just like somebody else. One of the great pet peeves I have about real estate is that so many top producers will get up in front of a group and say, here's what I want you to do. Don't reinvent the wheel, copy everything I've done. What terrible advice. Now, it sounds good. It sounds like, oh, I can just plug me into them. But can you do that? No, it's impossible. Unless you are a genetic clone of them, have the same personality, the same history, have the same everything else. Now, part of it I learned when I got started in real estate. I went to work for Century 21, Lake Viejo Realty in Mission Viejo, California. And at the time, Barbara Sundin was the #1 agent in the United States, and she worked in that office. Now, Barbara was a very interesting agent. She was one of the very first mega producers. And Barbara never knocked a door in her life, never made a cold call.